Elephants live in Africa and Southeast Asia, but not in Europe. This means that during the Middle Ages, most people here only knew about elephants from stories and rumors, which is painfully obvious from the paintings of the time. Like this one, where the elephants look more like anteaters with trumpets. Or this one that looks like somebody summoned a mythological vacuum cleaner. Or this one who seems to be wearing dancing shoes and looks like it would perfectly connect to a washing machine. Or this one that's simply a horse with a longer snout. But what a horse! It's so strong that it's carrying a little tower containing a small army on its back. And somehow they were under the impression that the only way to slay this beast is from underneath. Which kinda makes sense, but I don't understand why this guy is not taking seriously and being so silly with his tongue out. Anyway, they were right about some things. Elephants actually have been used in war for thousands of years, and they even had a kind of tower on their back which could hold about 4 archers. Moreover, they were enormous, terrifying, and had elephant armor. They had their tusks covered in sharp, pointy metal, and sometimes they tied chains or weights on the end of their trunks so they could swing them around like a giant mace on the battlefield. Problem was, if the elephant got scared, they were almost impossible to control, so you might end up trampled and maced over the head no matter whose side you were on. However, the elephant was indeed an important piece on the battlefield. So important, in fact, that in the game of chess, the bishop was not originally a bishop, but rather an elephant. Traces of this are still visible in some languages like Spanish, where the bishop is called alfil, which comes from Arabic, where it's also called alfil, which means the elephant. As I mentioned, people in Europe were not very familiar with the elephant, so when chess arrived on the continent, they changed the name of this one piece to something more familiar. In Germany, they called it Laufer or runner because he moved so fast and so diagonally. In England, they called it bishop because it looked like it was wearing a bishop's hat. And in France, they called him a fool, not because he was foolish, but because he seemed to be wearing a jester's hat. However, this traditional split shape was not a fool, nor a bishop, nor a runner, but likely it was meant to represent an elephant's tusks. And speaking of tusks, one of the most interesting things about them is that elephants have a preference for one or the other. That is to say, just like we are right or left-handed, elephants are right or left tusked, and you can tell which is the dominant one because often that tusk is shorter or worn down because it's been used more often for digging or fighting or scratching, I assume. Tusk seems like a perfect scratching instrument as long as you don't gouge your eye out. And speaking of, another consequence of European elephantine ignorance could be the emergence of the Cyclops. Not the X-Man, but rather the giant one-eyed mythical creatures that were excellent craftsmen despite having problems estimating distances. Well, it's believed these fabled giants came about because ancient Greeks kept discovering even more ancient elephant skulls, which look surprisingly cyclop-ish. I mean, they have a large hole in the middle where the nose goes, just like we do, but their nose is bigger, so the hole is bigger and rounder and looks like it might just be the socket of a single giant eye in the middle of the forehead. If you discover something like this and you don't know about elephants, Cyclops seems like the obvious guess. However, if you do know about them, you can use elephants in politics. Today in the United States, the two major parties are symbolically represented by a donkey and an elephant. Why these two animals specifically? Well, mainly from political cartoons. The donkey was associated with Andrew Jackson, who was said to be stubborn as a donkey, and the elephant comes from Thomas Nast, a famous cartoonist who made a series of illustrations, with the most famous one being this. Here, the elephant is meant to illustrate the idea that Republican voters are very numerous and powerful, but easily scared. Even a donkey disguised as a lion can send the elephant running into a pit of chaos while trampling underfoot the issues that really matter, like inflation or reform. Get it? I bet it was hilarious at the time. Initially, these animals were insults, but in time they came to actually represent the parties, evolving into symbols of pride. Because after all, donkeys are good guys, and elephants are even cooler, and I'm not the only one who thinks that. Napoleon liked them so much that he planned to build a giant elephant-shaped monument in his own honor. It was intended to be a colossal bronze statue standing 24 meters tall, nearly the height of an 8-story building, at the center of Paris's Bastille Square, complete with a fountain that spouted water from the elephant's trunk. Now that is high culture indeed. Unfortunately, there was this small issue in Waterloo which prohibited Napoleon from finishing his monumental elephant, and all that got built was a plaster model that was left standing for over a decade. During this time, it was mostly used as an improvised shelter either by rats or people, or Gavroche, the fictional character in the novel Les Miserables, where the elephant is described as decrepit and miserable, but also kind of magnificent, symbolizing the contrasts of Paris at the time. Eventually, the plaster elephant was demolished, but its pedestal still survives, and it was later repurposed as the base for another monument, the July column, which looks fine, I guess, but I personally would have preferred a elephanton. But don't worry. In the meantime, we got some other elephantastic monuments, like this 20-meter high one in Russia, or the tusked arches in Kenya, or this hotel that once existed in New York, or this 250-year-old building that is now a museum. But by far, the most impressive is a huge skyscraper. You see, in Thailand, elephants are so important that they made a whole 32-story building in the shape of an elephant, and it looks really cool. It's so amazing, you're not going to believe it. Stay till the end of the video to see it. I'm just kidding, I wouldn't do that to you. Here it is. Pretty cool, huh? However, even if you've seen the picture, I would strongly suggest that you stay until the end anyway, because these were just the first 8 out of 88 fascinating elephant facts. Even though medieval Europe was not very familiar with them, in other parts of the world, the elephant was an iconic animal, literally. One of the most important deities in Hindu religion is Ganesha, who has the head of an elephant and represents wisdom. And in that same vein, in Africa, Ashanti traditions say that elephants are reincarnations of past tribal chiefs. In Thailand, the white elephant is a traditional symbol of wealth and monarchy. And in Hindu cosmology, it is said that the entire world sits on the backs of 4 giant elephants, and there's another 8 that guard the cardinal points. A famous parable tells how a bunch of blind people put their hands on different parts of an elephant, trying to figure out what kind of animal it is, but feeling different things, they form completely different beliefs about the exact same thing. And that gets you thinking, what if we are actually those blind people and the elephant is society? Ooh. The elephant appears on various regional flags, on numerous Buddhist temples, in a variety of sports club emblems and proverbs and idioms, and of course, let's not ignore the elephant in the room. It has a long tradition in show business. The most well-known circus elephant was Jumbo, who was so famous that all over the world his name came to be associated with the idea of something very big. In other words, he wasn't called Jumbo because he was big, but rather big things are called Jumbo because that's what his name was. Elephants are everywhere in literature and films, from Dumbo with ears so big he could fly, to Horton who heard a who, to Babar who traded the jungle for the big city life, to the warrior beasts in Lord of the Rings, to Jules Verne's steam-powered mechanical elephant, to my friends the Indian elephants who were so friendly they ruined the marriage, and many others. The elephant is also a favorite subject in painting for renowned artists like Banksy, Andy Warhol, Salvador Dali, Paul Rubens, Rembrandt, but also artists forgotten by history, with some of humanity's first ever cave paintings depicting this spectacular animal. Or maybe they were mammoths, but still close enough. The point is, elephants have become such a huge part of global culture that they're now among the most famous animals on the planet. And precisely because we're so used to them, we sometimes forget how strange this creature actually is. I mean, if you didn't know about them and somebody told you what they look like, you wouldn't believe it. Like, what do you mean a giant 5-ton tank of an animal with ears so big you could wrap yourself in them, pillows for legs, a toilet brush for a tail, and long pointy teeth sticking out like mouth spears or something? Not to mention its trunk, which is basically a vacuum cleaner in the middle of its head that is a combination nose, hand, and fingers. That's pretty peculiar. But since we're on the topic, The trunk is one of the most incredible organs in the animal kingdom. Technically, it's a fusion of the elephant's nose and upper lip, but it can do so much more than that. It also functions as an arm, a very strong one, that can lift up to 350 kilograms, the equivalent of a bear or a motorcycle, or 4 of me if I actually weighed what I pretend to. But as powerful as it is, the trunk is also flexible. It's made up of tens of thousands of muscles and 0 bones, allowing it to elongate or contract, soften or harden, bend and twist into almost any shape, and it can manipulate small objects thanks to tiny muscular extensions at the tip of the trunk that function almost like fingers. And with those fingers, they can perform incredibly precise actions, like plucking a single blade of grass, or peeling a cob of corn, or cracking a shell of a peanut without damaging the nut itself, or performing a medium difficulty sleight of hand trick. I think I didn't actually fact check that one. Anyway, the trunk is really cool, but at the same time it sucks. Not in a negative way, but in a positive way. No, not that positive way, but in the sense that it can inhale air at an incredible speed. Do you know how fast the air comes out of you when you sneeze? Well, elephants pull the air in about 30 times faster than that. And I know what you're wondering, and the answer is yes. Elephants do also sneeze, and no, you wouldn't want to be around one when it happens. They spray a lot and almost never use tissues. But in addition to air, the elephant's trunk can also suck up an enormous amount of water. It can't drink through its trunk like a straw, but it can store up to 8 liters in there, which it can later spit out into its own mouth for drink, or over its body for cleaning, or if they're feeling playful, over other elephants for a bit of fun. Now I see where Napoleon got the idea from. Oh, another thing they do is blow dust all over their wet skin, which creates a crust that protects them from insects or the sun, which is something I naturally experience after a few days without a shower. And the trunk is so versatile that you almost forget that it's actually a nose. And not just any nose, the elephant has the best sense of smell of any animal in the world. Much better than dogs or bears or sharks, which kind of surprised me when I found out, but thinking about it for a second, it's like, yeah, of course this is the best nose in the world. Look at this thing. It's like the most expensive nose upgrade available in the game or something. And finally, because its nose is so long, probably the cutest thing an elephant does with it is to use it as a snorkel in order to breathe underwater. It's the kind of thing I thought only happened in cartoons, but they actually do that. Neat. But of course, besides their trunks, another thing elephants are famous for is just how big they are. They are the largest land animal in the world, reaching up to 4 meters tall and weighing as much as 10 tons, about the size of a bus, which is not surprising since they are sometimes used kind of like a bus. The elephant is so heavy that its legs are placed more vertically and underneath the body than other animals, almost kind of like pillars or the legs of a table, while something like a tiger or a horse have legs that are more flexible into the side of the body. And being the biggest, it's the biggest in many ways. It has the biggest heart of all the land animals, weighing 20-30 kilos, about as much as a sack of potatoes. It has the largest brain of any land animal, weighing about 6 kilos, about the size of a smaller sack of potatoes. And its brain lobes are so prominent that you can actually see them poking through their head. Look at that big curvy forehead, big brain buddy. Elephants also have the biggest eyelashes of any animal. That's probably why they're so seductive. And of course, they also have the largest, larynx of all animals. Oh, and the ears too. They're also the biggest. So big, in fact, that they're a very efficient cooling system. Not only because they flap them around like fans, but also because they contain many blood vessels through which they can cool their blood like a thermostat almost. And the closer the elephants are to the equator, the bigger their ears are, so they can cool themselves more efficiently. However, the most interesting thing about their ears is that in African elephants, they are shaped like the continent of Africa, and in Asian elephants, they are shaped more like like the subcontinent of India. Very neat. This is why I cover up my ears. I don't want people to know where I'm from. Elephants have no natural predators and are practically invulnerable due to their size, but to maintain their impressive posture, they have to eat about 200 kilograms of food and drink about 100 liters of water every single day. What a life. No calorie counting for them, I guess, which obviously means that on the other side of the equation, they also produce records like 50 liters of urine and over 100 kilograms of a solid record every day. 100 kilograms a day. My God, I thought I spent a lot of time on the toilet. Elephants modify their environment so much that they are considered a so-called keystone species, meaning they have a disproportionately large impact on the environment. After all, a daily dose of 100 kilos of dung will fertilize the soil, feed insects and birds and other small animals. It will disperse seeds over enormous distances and literally transform the flora around them, giving rise to plants and forests and meadows that wouldn't otherwise exist without the elephascinating. However, they both create and destroy vegetation because they eat a lot and because they like to knock down trees or break branches, preventing forests from becoming too dense and allowing other plants to grow, leading to more biodiversity. They also modify access to water. That is, they dig holes, widen them with their tusks or claws or feet, creating these natural sort of fountains from which other animals also drink, and by walking around on their tremendous bodies, they even create corridors through the vegetation which become like wilderness highways on which countless creatures circulate. If the lion is the king of the jungle, then the elephant would be the minister of transportation of the jungle, or minister of water or agriculture. I don't know. The point is they would be good in leadership positions because elephants are also renowned for their intelligence. As we've seen, elephants have huge brains, but as I often tell my dates, size isn't everything. More important in this case is how the brain size evolves. For example, most mammals are born with a brain that is about 90% of what it will weigh as an adult, meaning it doesn't change much throughout their life. However, newborn baby elephants arrive in the world with only 35% of their final brain weight, and this difference is thought to indicate how much of an animal's behavior is instinctual and how much is learned. And elephants can learn quite a bit. Like, they are among the few animals that understand the concept of pointing, meaning you can actually point and they understand the direction, and they can also point themselves, not using their fingers of course, but using their trunk fingers. Also, elephants are among the few species of animal that use tools, such as sticks and branches which they manipulate with their trunks to chase away insects, scratch themselves, or clean mud from between their toes, which sounds like a good idea. I might give that a try myself. Or sometimes they tear bark off trees, chew it up like gum until it forms a kind of a vegetation ball, which they use to cover the water holes they create to keep them fresh and hidden. Or in regions where their movements is limited by electric fences, they have been observed tearing them down either with boulders or with logs or with their ivory tusks because they don't conduct electricity very well. Either way, they always find a solution, and after all, they're pretty good at solving problems in general, as has been observed in various experiments, like one where the food is somewhere up high and the elephant can't reach it, so it moves some rocks underneath in order to climb on top of them. Or this other one in which the only way to get to the food was for two elephants to cooperate by pulling two ropes at the same time, and most of the time they understand and work as a team. Or one in which they observed how two buckets were filled with fruit in different amounts, and then they had to choose the bucket that contained more food, showing that they have a good memory and can keep track of quantities. In captivity, there were elephants that managed to unlock or unscrew the shackles with which they were bound, fiddling around with their trunks until they managed to free themselves like little Houdinis, or I guess rather big Houdinis. Even more fascinating about one of these cases is that after freeing herself, an elephant named Bandula would go around freeing others as well, and in order to achieve this, she was always careful not to be seen, meaning that she also understood the concept of deception. I mean, this elephant knew how to lie. And after all, they understand many human concepts, including the most basic of all, their own existence. Elephants are among few animals that recognize themselves in a mirror. That is, many animals react to a mirror, but elephants are actually aware that they are seeing themselves. And we know this because if you draw an X on their face, when they see the X in the mirror, they touch their face in that exact spot, almost as if they were trying to wipe it off. Some experts believe, although others disagree, that this type of behavior means that elephants are self-aware. And it's not that hard to believe, especially when you see how they live their lives in general. Elephants have one of the most complex social lives and tight-knit families in the animal kingdom. They live in matriarchal groups led by the oldest and most experienced female who knows where to get food and water and safety. However, they have relationships and friendships with dozens or hundreds of other elephants, including those from other groups whom they can recognize even after years of not seeing each other. Sometimes several families gather together and form a clan of hundreds of elephants who occasionally meet up to eat, exchange information, socialize, or play on a spider web. And these families are generally made up of only females and cubs, because at a certain age the males break away in search of lady elephants, and they live either isolated or with other males in informal bachelor groups. This is actually kind of necessary because when a male elephant goes into heat, it becomes a bit wild. This state is called must. It lasts a few months, during which their testosterone increases, they become more aggressive, more alert, fluid starts flowing from the side of their head. It's a whole thing. You don't really want to be around them. Oh, and maybe you are curious about how an elephant is actually able to, do its thing. After all, they don't exactly have the most flexible of hips, if you know what I mean. Well, don't worry about them, because they just need to maneuver their big bodies into roughly the right position, because it's not just the big trunk that's flexible. The small one is also extremely muscular and mobile and moves on its own until it finds its way and completes the act. Now that is a underrated superpower. After the male does the deed, he leaves and goes back out into the big wide world, leaving the female to take care of the baby, but not on her own. The calves are raised by the entire elephant family, and because the gestation period lasts about 2 years, the babies have to walk on their own legs almost immediately after they're born. Like within minutes. But it's okay, they get a lot of help and they do quite well, except for when they trip on their own trunk, which apparently happens quite often, as if they weren't cute enough already. Also, baby elephants are vulnerable and could be hunted by predators, so they are surrounded by the rest of the family to make sure nothing happens to them, especially since one of the most human-like traits of the elephant is that they seem to have death rituals. They appear to be particularly interested in the remains of other elephants, even if they never knew them, and they have often been observed spending a lot of time around the bones, lightly touching them with their trunks or feet, and even visiting that exact same spot years later. This is where the myth of the elephant graveyard comes from, which states that older individuals go to a certain place to die, but that's just not true unless it's a Disney movie. There are, however, accounts of elephants gathering around a dying family member, sometimes remaining by its side for days and days, gently trying to feed it or nudging it with their trunks in a final attempt to help it back on its feet, which is just about the saddest thing I ever heard. And after one of their own dies, elephants sometimes bury it, covering it with branches, leaves, or grass. And the strangest thing is that they don't just do that with members of their own species. There have been cases of people who fell asleep under a tree and woke up to an elephant trying to cover them with vegetation. And when the elephants realized that the people were actually alive, sometimes they would stay by their side in order to protect them. There were all kinds of cases like that because elephants are one of the most altruistic species in the world. They help each other out a lot, but sometimes they also help other species. They are renowned for being very gentle and careful around people so as not to hurt them, especially since they could do that very easily. A researcher tells a story of an elephant trained to place logs in holes in the ground, and it was doing that over and over until it stopped and refused to carry on because, unbeknownst to the people around him, there was a dog inside of that hole, and he didn't want to hurt the doggo. What a nice elephant. Or perhaps not. Some experts say it's not good to attribute human feelings to animals because we can't really know what's actually going on in those bulging brains of theirs, and after all, they are wild animals and can be dangerous. Very dangerous. Especially if they were to actually have human-like feelings and emotional reactions like revenge. There are multiple cases in which after being hunted and slaughtered, groups of elephants invaded villages, destroyed houses and crops and people, apparently to get revenge. We can't know if that was actually their intention, but it sure does look like it. Planet of the Elephants, anyone? But on a lighter note, another human trait that elephants seem to share is art. In zoos and museums around the world, you can buy paintings made by elephants. They're not exactly the Mona Lisa, but they have been compared to abstract expressionism. You know, things like this, in which case you might not see much difference anyway. However, there are also some more sophisticated works, including a famous one in which an elephant appears to be producing a self-portrait, which seems unbelievable because it is. I mean, the elephants do paint them themselves, but they are guided by a human who directs them on how to move the brush until they eventually learn the pattern by heart. So basically they're trained to do it. But still, it's something. On the other hand, they also have artistic inclinations in other fields, such as music. Since ancient times, it has been observed that elephants seem to have an affinity for music, being able to distinguish and remember simple notes and melodies or follow musical tempos. And if you don't believe me, then look at this elephant named Shanti, who likes to play the harmonica. No one taught him, he does it for fun, and even if he's not exactly Little Walter, the elephant seems to have his own musical style, ending his performances with a little crescendo. There is also an entire orchestra of elephants playing massive instruments specifically modified for them, such as drums and gongs and bells and xylophones and stringed instruments. They're left to their own devices to play around and improvise, and the resulting music has been described as atmospheric and experimental. Yeah, I bet. Because although this Thailand orchestra is an interesting tourist attraction, the original purpose was actually more of a scientific experiment to see if elephants can and will create music. The answer? I mean, just listen to their albums. And it's no wonder elephants are musical. After all, they already play the trumpet. This is the classic sound associated with elephants, and it's made by blowing air through their trunks in times of stress or excitement. However, that's just one of dozens of sounds that elephants can make. There's also this, and this, and this. And each of these sounds communicates all sorts of things like warnings of danger, calling the herd to gather, signaling mating intent, or even a simple hello. And the strangest thing is that most elephant sounds are at frequencies so low we can't even hear them. But other elephants sure can, even at distances of several kilometers. It's almost like they communicate by radio. A herd of elephants, even if they're dispersed and each one of them's minding its own business over a spread out area, they are always in contact with each other through a kind of wireless communication. In fact, sometimes you can see the elephants concentrating on receiving communications when they suddenly stop, remain motionless, bend over slightly, and touch the ground with their trunks to better sense the sounds coming from a distance. However, elephants don't just communicate through sounds. They are very tactile animals. To greet each other, they sort of shake hands, either by touching trunks or by curling them around each other. At least that's what the cool elephants do. The older ones discipline the younger ones by slapping them with their trunk or pushing them with their feet, and sometimes several elephants touch their trunks at the same time in order to exchange information or gossip or something. Anyway, because elephants are so smart, people thought of taking advantage of their smartness, but also their strength. After all, there are plenty of animals that have served humanity throughout history for all kinds of purposes. You know, you got your pigeons, horses, dogs, cows, donkeys, pigs, and many others, including elephants, except that unlike the other animals, elephants weren't domesticated but only tamed. To domesticate an animal means that it must be selectively reproduced for several hundred generations until it becomes gentle and docile. With elephants, you can't really do that because they're too big, they live too long, like 50-60 years, and they're too expensive to maintain, and at best they can give birth every 4 to 5 years. And they're also dangerous when they go into must, so elephants weren't domesticated, but they were captured from the wild and trained to do all sorts of things that we needed, with the most obvious example being construction. Before bulldozers and cranes and trucks, elephants were extremely useful on building sites. In fact, they were extremely useful even after this because they could travel over all kinds of difficult terrain, delicately navigating through trees better than any machinery. Not to mention that they were extremely strong, able to carry materials, food, people, and even position heavy things with remarkable precision. Throughout history, elephants have contributed to the construction of bridges and roads and fortresses and palaces and, of course, temples. And by the way, elephants were appreciated not just for their building skills, but also for their spirituality. As I said, elephants are an important religious symbol in Asia, so they played and continue to play an important role in numerous sacred ceremonies, royal processions, and traditional festivals. In fact, many of these elephants live exclusively in temples where they are kind of holy artifact of the Hindu religion, which is cool because, they get honored, but also questionable because they keep them in captivity. Just like their history in the circus, where due to their intelligence and interesting appearance, they were a source of amusement for millions of people. However, the role of elephants in all of these fields is one that's full of controversy and potential abuse. For this reason, their jobs in construction and religion and entertainment have been drastically reduced or even banned in recent years, although they still exist in some places, which is bad, but not worse than the worst thing that people have ever done to elephants: poaching. Besides their trunk, the most famous elephantine feature is probably their tusks. These are modified teeth that are good as weapons or as tools or to attract the opposite sex, or if they were wearing clothes, they could hang them up to dry, I suppose. Depending on the species of elephant, they can be almost non-existent or can grow up to 18 centimeters per year, reaching impressive proportions of over 3 meters and 40 kilograms. And precisely because they were so spectacular, these tusks were also noticed by people who found all kinds of uses for the material that they're made of. Ivory, as it is called, has been used throughout history for all kinds of things like sculptures, ornaments, jewelry, handles, buttons, combs, furniture, billiard balls, piano keys, false teeth, opium pipes, chess pieces, the whites in the eyes of statues, and much, much more. Ivory was highly sought after and had become a symbol of wealth because it looked good, was durable, easy to carve, and could be worked very precisely, especially to create perfect sealing lids for boxes, jars, vessels, and all kinds of musical, medical, or scientific instruments. It was a useful material, but it also had a pretty big downside: the fact that you had to, kill a ton of elephants to get it. Well, not always elephants. Ivory is mostly made of dentine, which is the bone tissue that teeth are made out of, so it's sometimes extracted from other toothier animals like a walrus or hippopotamus or narwhal or a whale or even warthogs. But by far the largest amount of ivory has been extracted from elephants, which were hunted in such large numbers that their population has declined almost unimaginably. 200 years ago in Africa, there were about 25 million elephants. 50 years ago, there were 2 million, and today there are about 450,000 left. And it's not like Asia is doing any better. There are only about 50,000 there, so about 500,000 elephants left in total on the planet. Humans have killed so many elephants that their tusks are actually becoming smaller and smaller, meaning that we have literally changed their evolution, favoring the reproduction of individuals with small or even non-existent tusks because they had a better chance of surviving. Throughout history, poaching became more and more profitable because the price of ivory was often close to the price of gold. So in 1989, finally measures were taken and the ivory trade became illegal all over the world. Although, of course, just because something is illegal doesn't mean it doesn't happen at all, unfortunately. Anyway, we were dangerously close to the total disappearance of elephants, and if we're not careful, that could happen again. Which is all the sadder when you see how intelligent and sensitive they are, how complex their emotional life is, and how many ways we see ourselves in them. And after all, we humans have become the dominant species on the planet because we're smart and we communicate and we cooperate and we have opposable thumbs. But who knows? In other circumstances, in a parallel universe, on a distant planet, I wouldn't be shocked if the dominant species was more elephant-like. After all, they're smart, they communicate, they cooperate, they're almost invulnerable to predators, and even if they don't have opposable thumbs, they have a crazy versatile trunk, so who knows? If one day we ever meet aliens, maybe they won't be little green men, but rather elephant-shaped.